All right, looks like everybody's set. Everybody's seated. Cameras ready? All right, just want to welcome everyone to the cabinet meeting. It's a lovely day in Albany. It's a shame to be inside with the curtains closed, but the state's business goes on. We have a number of announcements to make and some updates, but before we do that, I just wanted to acknowledge some changes in personnel in our state government and some new additions. To my left is Jamie Rubin, who you all know, now Director of State Operations. Jamie, thank you, came from HCR. Guillermo Linares, the new Acting President of the Higher Education Services Corporation. Good to have you, Guillermo. Ronnie Hakem, no novice here, an interim executive director at the MTA. And last but not least, Frank Hoare, who is our Deputy Secretary for Legislative Affairs, also a very seasoned person around these halls. We have a number of updates and announcements we'd like to go. We have a busy schedule, so I think we'll get right at it. Our Lieutenant Governor, Kathy Hochul, is going to give us a talk about child marriage.
Thank you, Bill.
Governor.
What we're going to be talking about today is really a continuation of the governor's and this administration's policies to protect people who've been exploited, underserved populations, people who are disadvantaged, and people who really have no voice. And so what we're going to be talking about today is changing a law because, as we know, we're not proud of this, in the state of New York, children as young as 14 years old can legally enter a marriage. And that actually puts us behind countries like Malawi, South Sudan, and Cambodia. And this goes back to 1929, and the current law says that the parents of the children can provide written consent for 16 and 17-year-olds. Consent, but also can mean coercion. And there's many circumstances by which young people could be forced in these situations, whether it's to give legal status to someone from another country, whether it's to have whatever reason is going on in their culture, but it really does not protect and look out for literally children. These are children we're talking about. And you think about the fact that there were nearly 4,000 minors married in the state of New York, again, under age 18. The majority of these were minor girls marrying adult men, which is appalling. And when they get into these situations, you find out some horrific statistics. And they have a greater chance of being beaten by a spouse if they marry before the age of 21, tremendous likelihood of being in poverty, dropping out of school. 50% of these children drop out of school, which makes them even more dependent on their spouses and their family. They're no longer independent. They have severe mental and psychological problems, and this has been established. I mean, this is just too young an age to take on those responsibilities. And again, it's primarily under duress and coercion. These are not 14 and 15-year-olds who are deciding, I want to be married today. So to continue our efforts in protecting vulnerable classes, the governor is advancing legislation to raise the consent to marry to 18 years old. This would require New Yorkers between 17 and 18 to obtain parental and judicial written consent. And the judicial consent is important because right now a judge is in the process, but they have no record, they have no history of anything that tells them the guidance. They have no idea what they should be looking for. So now, under the legislation that we're proposing, a judge would have to ensure that neither party has a history of domestic violence, any orders of protection against them, or a registered sex offender. The judge actually has to conduct an in-person interview with the minor to make sure that it's the child's free will, they're not being forced, they're not being coerced, or otherwise compelled to enter the marriage. And that will not endanger the mental, emotional, or physical safety of the minor. And if you actually do this, it'll be a crime in the state of New York. It'll be a misdemeanor if you issue a license to anyone in the state of New York. So what we're trying to do is ensure that these young people can live the New York promise that our governor speaks about often, that they can have independence, function under their free will, end up being independent adults who are not in a situation that is not their own doing, whether it's parental or societal. So this is something that's important to us, and we want to have legislation put an end to child marriage in our state. And we also at this time want to thank the advocates who've been fighting so hard on this. In fact, in our audience today, we have Jean Bucaria, the Deputy Director of NOW, who's been fighting on this issue. Jean, thank you very much. I want to recognize you. And also some of our members in the legislature, Senator Lanza and Assemblyman Paulin, have stepped forward with their own proposals as well. But this is important. I think it's, again, it falls under the umbrella of the governor looking out for people who don't have voices, whether they're nail salon workers, whether they're victims of human trafficking, or the whole initiative on sexual assault on college campuses. So, Governor, I want to commend you for embracing this initiative on behalf of the young women, particularly the young children of the state of New York.
Good, thank you. We'll open it up. Questions, anybody?
Thank you for presenting that. How do you think the Assembly and the Senate will deal with this? The governor just outlined, you know, how we're going to deal. So how do you think they'll react to it? And I know you have two sponsors.
I think if we need to, we can shame them. I think everyone who's a parent or has a daughter, and if you juxtapose your own child being in this situation, being forced into a marriage as a teenager against their will, I think we can get the support of the legislature by just laying out the facts of them, saying our position in the rest of the world is not something we want to, we're bragging about. We want to fix this situation, and again, the advocates who've been fighting for this will help us with the legislature as well.
I think, Rowan, I don't think people even knew this. I think they're going to be shocked, yeah, when they hear about the status of the law.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Governor. The next presentation is by Rick Cotton, who is our special counselor for interagency initiatives. Rick is going to deliver a PowerPoint about broadband, give us all an update as to where we are. Rick?
Thank you. Delighted to be able to share the next major step in the governor's broadband initiative. Before I plunge in to the PowerPoint, I do want to introduce Jeff Nordhaus sitting behind me, who is head of the Broadband Program Office and has been the key executive driving this. So before we turn to the specifics of the broadband, I just want to take a step back and put it in the context of the major infrastructure investment program that the governor has initiated. It has a major upstate component, ambitious, great scale, Plattsburgh International Airport, Hancock International Airport, Greater Rochester Airport, Schenectady Rail Station, the newly announced Empire State Trail, and all of the other projects that are on this chart. Downstate, from the north, Stewart Airport, the new Tappan Zee Bridge, well underway, the 4 Bronx Metro North stations, new airport at LaGuardia coupled with the air train, the Javits Convention Center, the 2nd Avenue subway, which, by the way, just finished the first phase on time, in case you didn't notice. On the LIRR, the double track and third track projects, and the Penn Farley complex, and newly announced with this at the State of the State, the governor's ambitions for JFK. Today, broadband is what electricity was a century ago. And there's a model that is a perfect analogy here. In 1931, Franklin Roosevelt, as governor, created the New York Power Authority to bring electricity to the most remote parts of the state. FDR said, electricity is no longer a luxury, it's a definite necessity. The utility companies at the time told him it couldn't be done. Too costly, too remote, too ambitious. But they were wrong. FDR's New York experiment paved the way for electricity throughout rural America, and it brought new opportunities and a new way of life. New York led the way on electricity, and today, thanks to the governor, it's leading the nation on broadband. Access to high-speed internet is essential to growing and competing in the 21st century global economy. Now, New York State is not only ambitious in terms of its build-out. The federal government has set 25 megabits per second as the standard for broadband. The governor has embraced, looking to the future, a standard of 100 megabits per second or greater. And high-speed broadband makes a huge difference in everyday life. Downloading a medical MRI, a file of 6 megabits, without high speed, 14 minutes. With high speed, seconds. With architectural renderings, as another example. No high speed, it's hours. High speed, it's a minute. An e-textbook, heavy in graphics. It can take as long with low-speed internet, and there are thousands, tens of thousands of New Yorkers in rural areas who do not have access to high speed. It could take as long as a day. High speed cuts it to 2 minutes. 2 years ago, 2.5 million homes in New York lacked access to high-speed broadband. Stunted the growth in those communities, limited opportunity for too many people. I've heard the Lieutenant Governor repeat endlessly, heard discussions with people upstate in terms of the hardships that causes on businesses, students. In 2015, the governor made a historic $500 million commitment to bring broadband access to every community by the end of 2018. Last year, we announced the first round of support to build statewide broadband. Round one invested $75 million in state and private sector funds. Today, we're announcing the release of the second round of broadband grants. Those will drive $268 million of investment in broadband upstate, $212 million of state investment, $56 million in private sector. And we're focusing on the most remote areas of the state. Round two will bring high-speed broadband access to 82,000 homes, 7,000 businesses, 90,000 locations. Put up on the chart the REDC regions that will receive the highest amount of support, and within those regions, the counties, Columbia, led by Columbia, but as you see, nine counties, all of whom will receive very substantial grants and very substantial build-out, totaling, as I said, 90,000 locations. So where are we? When Governor Cuomo announced his initiative, there were more than 2.3 million homes in New York State that did not have access to high-speed broadband. $343 million of investment, that is both round one and round two, plus PSC mandated build-outs and upgrades. And we're now on a path to assure that 98% of all homes in New York State will have access to high-speed broadband. The next step, the Broadband Office is now finalizing a third round, a third RFP, offering grants in those areas that we have not yet reached. The other hugely positive development was that last month, the FCC, in response to the governor's petition, awarded New York State $170 million in federal funding that had been destined to go elsewhere in the country. It is now committed to the New York broadband program. And that money will be deployed along with state funds in round three. We'll issue the RFP in 30 days. Big picture, we're opening new doors for upstate, bringing us one step closer to broadband for all New Yorkers by the end of next year. If you then look back, when the governor announced his program, 69% of New York homes had access to broadband, to high-speed broadband. This year, we have commitments that will expand that to 98%, and we're looking with the third round of the program to hit the governor's goal of 100% by the end of 2018.
Good report, Rick. Jeff, thank you for your work. Any questions, any comments?
You know, I'm just going to echo what Rick said and thank Rick for his leadership on this, and Jeff and the team at ESD who work with Jeff. I think the electricity metaphor is perfect, because really you don't have an economy without broadband. There aren't any people who want to live or even visit or invest going forward where you don't have broadband. If you think about it, by 2019 or 2020, it's just, it takes you out of the game completely. So this is foundational. It's key to the economy for every corner of New York State. So I want to thank them.
I second that. This was much harder than you would have thought. And what was happening was the areas of high concentration of population, the private companies would run the broadband because it was worth their economic while. It was upstate New York in the remote areas that didn't get coverage. So you had to figure out how to incentivize the private sector companies to actually bring coverage, because Howard's point is exactly right. Without broadband, hotels don't work, businesses don't work, children in those homes don't have the same opportunities. So it was really a combination. The PSC did a great job. Congratulations to you, Madam Chairperson, when you were approving companies, ESD, the grants. But 98% is really great. 4 years. Well done.
Yeah, a necessity and certainly a game changer, so thanks, Rick and Jeff. We have one final presentation before Governor will make some comments and open it up to questions. We have Alfonso David, the counsel to the governor, who's going to talk a little bit about special elections. Alfonso.
Thank you, Bill. As many of you may know, there are currently 2 vacancies in the New York State Legislature. One, Senator Bill Perkins, who was recently elected to the New York City Council, and the second, Assemblyman Joseph Saladino, who was appointed to the Oyster Bay Town as an Oyster Bay Town Supervisor. Under current state law, the governor is authorized to proclaim a special election for certain vacancies, and the governor's proclamation must be issued no less than 70 days and no more than 80 days from the date of the special election. To ensure that all constituents are represented in the districts that now have vacancies, the governor is seeking to call a special election at the earliest possible date. We were notified earlier this week that the New York City Board of Elections plans to certify Senator Perkins's election by the voters today, with the appropriate documentation to be submitted. And as a result, the governor intends to proclaim a special election to fill both vacancies. And the proposed date for the election is Tuesday, May 23rd. We intend to issue a proclamation memorializing the special election in the next few days.
Thank you, Alfonso. Bill?
Rick? The special election is important because these vacancies can be filled in time for the incoming legislators to participate in the legislative session. They won't be in time for the budget, but they will be in time for the conclusion of the session. So that's important. Again, kudos to Rick Cotton and the whole team on the broadband. That leaves you the last 2%, which is probably the hardest to do, right? Yeah, you'll get there. We believe in you. And the marriage law, Governor, I think that's a powerful signal because it's going to trigger the issues that you've been working on, we've all been working on, the exploitation of young women, et cetera. It's more than just the marriage law that's about. It's about trafficking, it's about sexual exploitation, et cetera. So we'll aggressively move that forward. And as we said at the beginning, this month will basically be a budget negotiation month with the legislature. And that is ongoing. Our budget doesn't have any response to any possible federal changes, and we're going to have to watch how the federal budget shapes up. That could have a dramatic effect on our budget if the proposals affect Medicaid or housing funds, if they pass and if they go into effect in a timely way. So we're watching that, negotiating the budget. Hopefully that's done by about April 1. And in the meantime, we just keep doing what we're doing, which is running the government. And that's not especially in this town. That's in communities all across the state. And keep making progress.